Like most horror movies, this one climaxes with a knock at the door. And it opens to find Vance Balter standing there with a gun. He fires at State Senator John Hoffman, who falls on the floor, and then fires again at his wife, who's able to push him out the door where his daughter shuts and locks it. She calls the police, he flees on to his next victim, which is Melissa Hortman, her husband, and his dog, about a mile or two away up the road. I think there's so much going on in the news that we forget the story. Someone killed their state senator, not for no reason. When cops entered Vance Balter's car, they found protest flyers for No King's Day and a list of targets, both Democrats and pro-abortion organization leaders. I don't know if you've ever been to the Congo. I don't know if you've traveled there from Minnesota, but it's a long flight. Long enough to change your mind. And Vance Balter didn't do that. This was a devout Christian, through and through, just trying to share the word. And in his sermons, he's preaching about confused people, gender dysphoria, gay homosexuality, and of course, people that commit abortion. And let me just say, this is after Supreme Court Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor both write letters warning against the rise of political violence. Even Chief Justice John Roberts wrote about this in the 2024 year-end report, citing some information and data from the FBI that notes an increase in politically motivated violence against political officials. A lot of threats have come in the internet thread of this thing called pizza doxing. Well, they'll send the pizza to your home with your name written on it or another name. It's a callback to Judge Esther Salas in New Jersey, I think. Andor was a son of Judge Esther Salas, and he was murdered when he opened the door for a pizza delivery worker who really was a Vance Balter type character in disguise. Instead of finding Judge Esther Salas, though, he found Daniel, and he fired at him, fatally shooting him. But it isn't just pizza. It isn't just a knock on the door. Sometimes it's a Molotov cocktail through the window. Just ask Pennsylvania Governor Ben Shapiro, who had that happen to his home. Sometimes it's a hammer. Ask Nancy Pelosi and her husband, who, when an intruder entered at the middle of the night, hit her husband with a hammer. I think he required surgery from those injuries. I mean, you literally in 2018 had a Florida man beat up another man in a gas station yelling, "This is for Trump," in what was perceived to be a racially motivated attack. And speaking of Trump, I mean, he himself calls for political violence. If they loot, we shoot, hit him in the kneecaps. If they spit, we hit. Most recently, back in my day, they'd be walking out in a stretcher. I mean, he was no stranger put to political violence. In fact, studies show that counties that host Trump rallies see a spike in hate crimes afterwards. So are you seeing the pattern here yet? Do you see a name come up more and more often? MAGA, Trump. No kidding. In the years 2015 to 2024, 76% of the 429 extremist-related deaths were committed by right-wing ideology, MAGA ideology. In 2021, the ADL reported 26 out of 29 incidents were at the cause of right-wing ideology. And former FBI Director Christopher Wray also says that the biggest domestic threat to America is white supremacy, a right-wing ideology. The Intercept did an entire website's worth of special investigations into how white supremacists have infiltrated United States' police forces. But a quote from Chris Wray, the former FBI director, points at a specific event that kind of encapsulates this whole phenomenon. He states, January 6th was not an isolated event. Domestic terrorism has been meditizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon. Now, the scale of January 6th was immense. About 1,575 people from all 50 states gathered in one place to commit treason. It is one of the most infamous acts in U.S. history. And if you look in the last 250 years of American history, there's a lot of stiff competition in that category. And look, for the point of this video, whether you agree or not on their actions, it was a big action. They felt a level of conviction. And I'm curious what would make them do something like this. Listen to Vance Balter's sermon. Watch the videos, the passion, the care. getting on a flight from Minneapolis to Congo to speak to a bunch of people that you don't even know speaks English. That's that same sort of conviction that those same January 6th insurrectionists held. And I'm curious about that. Where does that come from? Where does the passion come from for a good man or a good Christian like Vance Bolter to go out and murder somebody? It's because partially Vance didn't look at himself as a murderer. They didn't look at themselves as insurrectionists on January 6th. They looked at themselves as patriots. But how could you think something like this was patriotic? I mean, you're literally stepping on the Constitution. You're stepping on and defiling American presidents' faces. How could so many people be so loud and so wrong at the same time? The answer to this question really is just the tip of the iceberg to something much greater. It's about a perfect storm of conditioning, displacement, and exploitation. A mass psychosis that calls upon the Antichrist. What we're about to discuss is the greatest and the oldest trick that the devil has ever pulled. It's how they stay at the top and we stay at the bottom. What I'm about to explain is how the devil creates his army. How man loses himself to the very thing he tried to fortify himself against. The Oedipus prophecy. The valorous patriot is really the treacherous treasonist. But how do you confuse the two? Well, it happens very often. This contradiction exists within the Bible itself, within the very character of God himself. Bit of a tangent here, but it's important for you to understand if you don't know Catholicism that well. The Old Testament is brutal. It's quite brutal. The God that we see there is very vengeful. He is violent. He is petty. He is wrathful as well. Since we're talking in the case of power, it's much easily described as a God who rules through hard power, not soft power. God corrects misdirection through force, not soft guidance. He forces acknowledgement of his power and will through lasting example, through sacrifice and pain and suffering. You know, frogs from the sky, the whole Cain and Abel situation, and Abraham too, Moses, so on and so forth. Sodom and Gomorrah, the 10 Commandments, golden calf, yada yada. Our first relationship with God is an intense one. It's a violent one. And the lesson left is that we are impressionable and susceptible to the will of God, that there is one God Almighty. I don't mean to get preachy to you, but I want you to understand what goes on in the mind of someone that might be reading the Bible and might be learning about God if they start from page 1. They might really believe in an idea of divine justice and righteous violence. God himself in the Old Testament was a warrior. He was a soldier, and he expected and commanded as much of us as that. Just look at what he asked the Israelites to do. So it's very easy for someone that is a devout Christian to look at themselves in that way, into the purest and first relationship with God that we learn about. They're not murderers, they're instruments of God. And so for that reason, it's probably very relevant to talk to you about radicalization theory and what that means. I mean, in big 2025, right, we're deep in Trump's second, we're only less than a year in, but it feels deep. We're deep into Trump's presidency, second presidency, and probably know by now already what it means to become radicalized, how these isolated young white men become, radical. But if you don't, here's the very awesome Andrew Callahan to explain it for you. So yeah, symptoms of loneliness, no purpose, no money, no hoes. This all creates a void that anybody is looking to fill. Don't have a family, don't have a job, don't have a purpose, no worries. We have all of that for you. You can join this family. Oh, and by the way, in this family, we love to blow up cars in crowded markets. When you look into Vance Bolter's life, he checked off all of those boxes. Dude, according to federal court records, he was making $450 per week, no shame, from part-time work, and he was facing severe financial problems. Apparently, he didn't live with his wife. He lived with a roommate best friend, and his friend David Carlson told CNN that he was struggling to find work. Despite this financial stress, Vance also had some grandiose ideas of self. He claimed that he was a professional security contractor with experience in foreign conflict zones. I don't know if he thought he was a member of Blackwater, but that's the way he set himself out to be. His friend David Carlson called that a fantasy, and that they liked to play fantasy even as kids. So this was all the classic signs, right? Social isolation, financial stress, grandiose delusions of self. And let me tell you who else shared a few of those tendencies: the January 6th insurrectionists. And you know what? It's kind of lucky that we were able to get almost 1,600 of Trump's die-hard supporters into the system, because there's a lot of data we can glean from them. Let me drop some of those facts with you. So, out of the almost 1,600 Trump supporters that were arrested for January 6th, about 18% had filed for bankruptcy. Now, that's double the rate of the general population at the time. 20% were facing home foreclosures, and 25% had been sued for unpaid debts. And an interesting one is that 42% of those who were in financial distress had a violent crime charge as well. You might think I'm reaching for straws, but there is a clear connection between facing stress and wanting to take it out with your fists. There's also a clear connection to deaths of despair. Now, deaths of despair are categorized as deaths that come from alcohol, drugs, or suicide. You know, how you kill yourself slowly or fast based on how sad you are. They say that 70,000 people die from deaths of despair a year. And many of the January 6th insurrectionists felt those crimes. They were alcoholics, which, attests to the violentness of their crimes, or they were sexual pests. What we can glean from all of this, the financial stress, deaths of despair, is one common conclusion, which is that when people are broke, they get anxious. They get a status anxiety. And when you feel like you're on the decline and you feel like you're about to hit rock bottom, it's not often you're looking to blame yourself. You're looking for a scapegoat. I want to be clear again. What I am describing is not unique to MAGA folks. Rogue terrorists go through the exact same thing. We might not understand it because it's different cultures or countries, but rest assured, best believe, young men are being recruited everywhere into gangs, into terrorist organizations, into right-wing parties. Shit, forget the recruitment. Just people in America, in the world, deal with financial stress, are dealing with anxiety, are dealing with social isolation and a lack of purpose. And I know most of them won't become Vance Bolter, but most of them will storm the Capitol, and 78 million of them would vote for Donald Trump. As FBI Director Christopher Wray puts it, domestic terrorism cases have doubled during his watch, and perpetrators can move quickly from rhetoric to violence. What he means is this: there is a spectrum, from voting to donating to sharing memes to attending rallies to joining militias to committing violence. And the full range of that spectrum has the same fuel. There is an economic reality to this, all right? White people aren't totally crazy about what they're feeling, but it is a little bit misdirected, okay? I am firm in my belief that the 2024 election was decided on kitchen table values, kitchen table issues, economics, right? The price of groceries and gas is too high for people. Kamala didn't speak to that very well. I'll say she didn't speak to it at all because she wanted to keep things the same. But someone that offered anything different than what's happening right now was Trump. See, regardless of your political party or your education level, you understand and you felt the fact that wages have not kept up with the price of everything in the world. Since 1978, CEO wages have increased 1,085%, while workers have increased just 24%. So, this is just happening to everybody. So what makes fragile white men so fragile about it? I'll explain it to you. It's a perfect cocktail of relative deprivation, status anxiety, and American exceptionalism. Here we are. So relative deprivation is the feeling that someone else has more than you, right? Or the awareness that someone has more than you. Maybe you're not sad with what you have, but you're sad now that you see that somebody else has more. It makes you think, am I wrong? Do I not deserve this? You feel for whatever. This is a special way of saying you're just a hating ass nigga. Okay, I'm gonna put it clear like that. You feel that for whatever reason, something was deprived of you. You've been deprived of what you've rightfully earned. Status anxiety is the feeling of being unsuccessful and thus undesirable. So when you hear in the news, and a lot of these men are like, women are like, I want a man that's gonna buy this. A man's got to do that. A man's got to do this. You become a little bit more anxious about your status and anxiety, understanding that maybe the quote unquote typical woman doesn't need you and you have nothing to provide for her because you're a broke ass nigga. So simply put, when you're losing jobs and buying power and status, when you see other people gaining a bit of civil rights and some job opportunities, it looks unfair. As a matter of fact, you might say all the opportunities that you're missing and the reason why you're on the decline is because these people are getting one up on you. Now, the third thing that turns a radicalized person into a violent radical person, at least in this case, is the idea of American exceptionalism. Now, if you were promised the idea of the American dream, you've done everything right, but you feel deprived of what you've earned and your status is at risk, you feel insecure about your status in society, you begin to wonder if this idea of the American dream is true. And it's not. But the idea of American exceptionalism is the belief that United States is the greatest and most advanced, smartest country in the world. And so thus are its people. It's fair, it's equal, and people can achieve the American dream just if they work hard enough. When that illusion shattered, instead of blaming Ronald Reagan for trickle-down economics or Citizens United for putting moneyed interests into politics, instead of doing all that, it was way more easier to blame it on secular liberals and immigrants and transgender people and Muslims. This is the definition of the cope is real. And look, in this next part, I want to be clear. None of what I'm about to say is in defense of reactionary politics. I just want us to understand and have some empathy for a second, right? Where you consider yourself a liberal, you think you're Mr. Empathetic, practice some empathy right here for these people. I just want you to understand how these people, how God's creatures can end up in this position. So, to help visualize how these things affect the perception of reality, I tried to create a chart. Here it is. I call it the social status index. I took a few metrics for quality of life, the median incomes, graduation rates, labor force participation, and share of political representation. And I weighed them in a bunch of different ways. So income gets a 40% weight, education gets 20%, economic opportunity gets 20%, and representation gets another 20%. So we set the threshold that white males in the 1950s score 100% right here. And so you see the results. You see the change in these years and for the rise of other groups. What I'm saying here is the human mind isn't walking around and interacting with the world considering this gap. Hell, they aren't even considering the chart in general. They've only got capacity and prerogative to think only of their position in this chart because they need to survive. They ain't got no time to think about what you're doing. But what they do notice, what they do pay attention to, is that they visibly decline. To assess the situation, they find another group has risen in this time. And the group that shows a rise is carrying a narrative that you are to blame. where you have grace and patience for other people is people are moving off of vibes and feeling and perception. They're not walking around with this chart in their mind and knowing, oh, hey, I grew, per percentage wise, rate wise, in a proportional way to someone else. They're not thinking about this. They're thinking about them and how they feel and how they look and how they're living. I have to be honest though, this is a bad chart. It's obviously a bad chart if you know anything about reading charts. You can't present this chart to people and think that you're going to be telling the truth. It's not very good at explaining the situation at all. And I'll just be honest about its problems, right? First of all, it's too general. It needs to get more granular and show the different types of income earners, right? If you make a high amount of income, if you make a medium amount of income, if you make a low amount of income, because not everybody makes the same amount of money. And dividing by race is a subjective experience. You lose a lot of the population. What about rich black people? What about poor white people? That part. As it stands, everybody's stats is just absorbed into the majority. You don't get a really good picture of how people's lives are actually moving. Also, it assumes a linear progress over time, like it's just always going to go up. People can make more money one year than they do another year. So the first chart I showed you is assuming averages based on the fact that, every minority is poor. It failed to illustrate the extensiveness and the pervasiveness of wealth inequality, actually, because it doesn't just affect people by race. It affects us interracially as well. So it wasn't just that white men made the most amount of money. It was that the people that made the most amount of money were white men. So in a less complicated way, the first chart I showed you kind of says that white men are the 1%. But the truth is the 1% is mostly just white men. There are plenty of white men that are middle class and poor. This is what a better chart would look like. I stole it from Johnny Harris. Thank you, Johnny Harris. It addresses the most important issue, which is documenting the rate of increase via income level. When you consider that majority of American economic growth gone directly to the 1%, and I guess now the 0.1%, it paints a vastly different picture that flattens the curve we previously focused on. This explanation makes more sense to 80% of the population in Utah or Wyoming or Nebraska. People that were never rich relative to whatever they were looking at on TV, on HBO, on NBC. What they thought they actually deserved and earned and worked harder for than the city slickers up in New York and in DC. So when we see charts like these, we need to understand that it is a policy issue, not a cultural one. Not only does looking at this whole thing relatively make people feel less crazy, it also makes them feel less racist. But if you aren't paying attention, it makes everybody else look crazy for not seeing what you're talking about. People are hurt, isolated, confused, and broke. And they need more than someone to just take a blame for this. They need someone to actually fix it. They need someone to actually cleanse this earth of secular liberal culture. Someone to make America great again. They need a savior. I think it was Mark Twain that once said, if you want to keep a friend, you don't discuss money, politics, or religion. Well, ain't nobody told old Donnie Boy that, because he's made a career out of rage baiting all three. He filters the image of himself through these three polarizing topics. Through money, he is luxury personified and a successful businessman, which is a lie. Through politics, he is the alternative to the status quo, the infiltrator of the deep state, the drainer of the swamp. The answer to the establishment corrupt politician, which is an even bigger lie. And through religion, well, let's just ask Senator Lindsey Graham, shall we? But that's just all symbolic, right? They don't really view Trump as some theocratic leader that's gonna lead through the mandates by God, right? Of course not. Just ask former governor of Arkansas and ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
That does sound a little theocratic, especially when you're considering it's coming from the ambassador of a country as consequential as Israel right now. Maybe we just asked the wrong person. Mike Huckabee is a pastor, after all. It's not like he's a representative of or a speaker of the House of Conservatives, right?
I'll show you the chapel in here. Not a lot of people have seen this, but it's one of my favorite parts of the building, and we've already used it quite a bit, and we'll be using it every morning.
So every morning?
Yes.
Okay, so my team back in the White House, the last thing we did before we went to the podium was have a prayer. Yeah. So literally end in prayer and then go speak to the press. So each morning, will you have a ritual?
This will be my discipline to come in here and seek the Lord's guidance for what we do each day.
Okay, I see what you did there. Speaks for the House, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Good one. But look, I bet being a good speaker means you gotta be a little metaphorical sometimes, right?
Thanks to God Almighty for protecting President Trump and for turning his head on Saturday as the shot was fired.
All right. They might be a little serious here. Maybe they really do view Trump in this way, but there's no way they're letting that dictate their policy making.
Where does my support for Israel come from? Number one, because biblically we're commanded to support Israel. But number two...
Hold on.
I'm not holding on.
Hold on. You're a senator, and now you're throwing out theology, and I am a Christian, and I am allowed to weigh in on this. We are commanded as Christians to support the government of Israel?
We are commanded to support Israel. Define Israel. Do you not know what Israel is? That would be the country you've asked like 49 questions about.
So that's what that's what God is talking about.
The nation of Israel, yes.
So is that the current borders, the current leadership? He's talking about the political entity called Israel?
He's talking about the nation of Israel. Yeah, nations exist, and he's discussing a nation. A nation was the people of Israel.
Is the nation
They're the
God's
descendants of
referring
Abraham.
to in Genesis, is that the same as the country run by Benjamin Netanyahu right
Yes.
now?
So I guess if it sounds like our foreign policy is being directed by a misinterpretation of the Bible, you might be right, and we might be fucked. Dispensationalism is a specific way of interpreting the Bible. It sees humanity as existing in different eras or dispensations. And for each dispensation, each period, our relationship with God is a little bit different. He wants different things from us. This interpretation tries to take like an originalist approach at the Bible. And it's been adopted by eschatologists who are obsessed with bringing about the rapture of the world. Yes, I mean that. Crucially, dispensationalists believe that modern-day Israel is the same Israel that they were talking about in the Bible, the same one that is important to fulfill biblical prophecy. They believe that the creation of the nation of Israel in 1948 sets the stage for the end times. To be specific, according to dispensationalist theology, before Jesus can return, several things must happen. One, Israel must be restored as a nation. Check, that happened in 1948 in their opinion. Two, Jews must return to their holy land. Semi-check, that's kind of ongoing. And third, a temple must be built in Jerusalem, specifically on the top of Mount Olive. And that part is what's currently in progress. And then when that's built, there will be a great tribulation followed by the Battle of Armageddon, where Jesus defeats the Antichrist. No bullshit. Most Jews will die in this final battle, except for a small remnant who are the ones that will convert to Christianity. So this is why a lot of evangelical Christians believe that it is their duty to support Israel in whatever their goal is, because that supports their goals and their mission as a Christian. So in their mind, opposing Israel is in essence opposing God's plan. This is unlike other Christian interpretations of the Bible, which sees, God's commandments being fulfilled spiritually through Jesus Christ, Christianity. And dispensationalists believe that this Bible has literal geopolitical means in the real world. But those guys are kooks, right? Who cares about them? They have no power. Well, remember that Speaker of the House I was talking about, Mike Johnson? Well, at a Christians United for Israel event in 2024, he echoed the statements of the dispensationalists, stating, "God will bless the nation that blesses Israel." This is literally a quote from the Bible said by Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, at an event for a super PAC bigger than AIPAC. In fact, picture this, not too long ago, Mike Johnson stood on a hilltop in an occupied West Bank, one of the first members of Congress to end up in the West Bank in some time, and he was stroking a red calf, a red heifer to be exact. And as he's stroking this cow, he states, telling cameras that this land that he's in, this occupied West Bank, rightfully belongs to the Jewish people. A claim that flouts both international law and official US policy. And that cow isn't just a prop. It's not just a photo op. It's part of this scripture. It's part of this prophecy. So it's one of 5 perfect red heifers that were air freighted from Texas under the category as a pet, because you cannot ship meat. You cannot ship cattle from America to Israel. And that was done by a Texas oil tycoon by the name of Byron Stenson. Cattle, dispensationalists believe, must be sacrificed to trigger the third temple and essentially the rapture. So no bullshit, US Texas oil billionaire tycoon Byron Stenson sends out these red cows specifically for the sacrificial ritual of bringing about the end times. And this was not only acknowledged, but amplified by United States Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Is it starting to make a little bit more sense now why we're spending billions on this country? And if you think I'm bugging, if you think this was a one-time visit, last year, Mike Johnson invited Stinson and Rabbi Yitzchak Mamo to the Capitol Hill to brief other right-wing leaders about this whole dispensationalist theory, this whole cow sacrifice thing, to get these people on board. If you don't think this is consequential, please understand that Mike Johnson is 2 heartbeats away from the President of the United States. And he's doing this hand in hand with the movement that preaches political violence is part of God's will once the end times begin. In other words, Vance Bolter's gun was loaded way before he even picked it up. Johnson's trek to Shiloh wasn't tourism, it was live action scripture. Okay, for dispensationalists, ticking off Numbers 19, the whole red heifer sacrifice, is step 3 on a checklist that ends with Revelation 13's global catalysm. The speaker is trying to help set the timer. I don't know how much clearer I can make this. Oh, what was that? I can make it clear? I will. Mike Johnson isn't just Speaker of the House and some kook that likes to travel to Israel from time to time. He is a member of the New Apostolic Reformation Church. It's a dispensationalist church with a lot of political friends. People in that church are very close friends. Mike Johnson lives with his pastor in the DC home, and Ted Cruz is also very tight with the church. And he shares these same eschatological views. I mean, we saw as much on that Tucker Carlson clip. But it doesn't start for Ted Cruz there. I mean, even his father, Ted Cruz's father, Rafael Cruz, is also even given sermons preaching about the end times transfer of wealth, whatever that means. The NAR believes a few other things that are very important to its connection to politics. So the first is dominionism, that Christians must take control of 7 key aspects of society: government, business, education, entertainment, media, family, and of course, religion. They believe that politics are a literal battle between the supernatural forces of good and evil. They think their opponents are demons. They nickname demons Demoncrats. They also believe uniquely in modern day apostles and prophets who receive direct revelations from God. So I guess that kind of explains that text from Mike Huckabee and these jokes from Lindsey Graham and the wet dreams I'm sure Mike Johnson has about Donald Trump. Hell, they might even look at themselves as the apostles, bringing about the rapture, fulfilling God's will. No bullshit, y'all. This is what they believe and they give their money to. Another popular leader of the NAR church is Dutch Sheets. He was made an honorary colonel twice, once in the state of Kentucky by Governor Andy Beshear, and he was made honorary traveler by Arkansas Governor Hutchinson. He's also famous for starting a global daily prayer app called Give Him 15 with millions of users across the globe with the aim of uniting all Christians of the world together for a 15-minute prayer every day. It seems pretty chill until you realize that it's a propaganda machine used to spread election fraud, conspiracy theories, amongst other things.
The title of this Give Him 15 is All Election Fraud Will Be Found Out. What is happening in this election is no longer just about the presidency.
Oh, by the way, Dutch also loves this flag. No, not this flag. This flag. The appeal to heaven flag. It's been adopted by white Christian nationalists, but also has been seen in the office of Mike Johnson, in the Supreme Court Justice Alito's office, and on top of the building of the Small Business Administration for whatever reason. And infamously, you know where else it's been seen? At the January 6th riot. Wow, what great company. I mean, evangelical Christians even have their own office and prayer division inside of the White House right now. Take a look at this.
And so we declare right now for the capital of our nation that America will come back to God. We will come back to God. Nothing will stop this nation. And we speak right now by the authority of heaven. You told us to bring heaven to earth. Heaven is being released through your people right now.
So it's safe to say that they've taken Christianity and perverted it for American political means. They've moved it to become part of American policy. They take the idea of spiritual warfare and aim it directly at Democrats. They take God's chosen people and make it about white Americans only. They take Genesis 12:3 and they make that its foreign policy. They take end times prophecy and make it about Israel needing more and more bombs. To them, this is all spiritual warfare. So you can understand why they need soldiers, patriots, and why they're recruiting. United in Purpose, a data mining operation, compiled 191 million voter records and gave point scores for each of them based on religious activity. Owner Bill Dallas has said, we pretty much have the entire voter population data. Ziklag, a Christian right group, got $12 million from Hobby Lobby's Green family and Uline's family to do election integrity, which is essentially election fraud, voter outreach, and anti-trans campaigns. AIPAC expanded to include evangelicals through Sufi, Christians United for Israel, I mentioned that earlier, adding 11 million members to AIPAC's 100,000 members. 15% of the United States population are confirmed MAGA Republicans, and 60% of them think that political violence is acceptable. That's 20 to 30 million Christian Zionists who have been told that Democrats are literal walking demons. Real quick, I want to talk about why religious propaganda works so much more dangerously than just your typical political propaganda, which is dangerous as well. There are several fallacies involved here. Certain forms of religious political rhetoric can amplify divisive messaging through specific mechanisms. So, how does this work? The several fallacies are claims of divine authority, apocalyptic framing of current events, dehumanization of opposing groups, and assertions that actions are beyond normal legal constraints. While these patterns aren't unique to any single faith, right? I'm not picking on any religious tradition here. They've historically appeared in various extreme movements and can contribute to political violence when taken to extremes. The grift makes its way to podcasts. You see guys like Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk, and now even Joe Rogan a little bit, like sprinkling in some religiosity into their rhetoric, talking about, oh, the Bible and the God and how great it is. But none of these people are pastors, and none of these people are theologians. Now they're all suddenly experts on Christianity and what it means and what it looks like politically. And the hilarious thing is that they have no idea what they're talking about. Much like Tucker Carlson or Ted Cruz, they pick and choose and purposely misinterpret gospel for their own political means. But man, I must be crazy now, right? Am I looking at things the right way? Patrick, you must be crazy. There's no way that the government has been infiltrated by extreme evangelical Christians with an end times philosophy that they want to fulfill, right? There's no way that you think people actually believe any of this stuff, do you? Like, how could it be that MAGA is fighting a spiritual war, yet at the same breath they've cut funding for US aid, which helps starving children all over the world? That's not a very Christian thing to do, is it? How are these people even trying to be good Christians? Maybe we are in end times. Maybe we are in a spiritual war. But if this really is an internal battle between good and evil, those people I just mentioned don't sound like the good guys. In my opinion, it's clear why a politician would lie about being deeply religious, right? We almost expect them nowadays to make some ambiguous remark or some pointed gesture about God and their faith, but very aloof, right? Not to be super specific or super devout to any one thing, unless you're a devout evangelical Christian and you're a Republican. Otherwise, you're just trying to do something safe to make it seem like you're a good person and you have a conscience, and you stay up at night wondering and asking God why. They do this not to appeal to voters. I mean, yes, to voters, but they do it mostly to appeal to donors, to billionaires, because when you're a billionaire, you just have enough money to put your own views of the world onto the world. And the funny thing is, the donors know doing that is unpopular, which is why they hide their money, names, and views, because, quote, controversial groups might give family or business negative exposure. I think that quote came from the Hobby Lobby's Green family. Here's how their scam works systematically. Spoiler alert, they're all grifters. So this is actually a very important thing to know. Religious donations get a 37% tax deduction. Political contributions get 0 tax deduction. So billionaires funnel money through religious institutions so they can donate and hold and hoard their money tax-free. There it is. There you go. This is why they pretend to be religious, because you can't tax the church. And instead of giving that money to the big government that's just gonna redistribute it to undeserving inner city kids, they rather spend that money on political influence so they can get laws and regulations passed that'll make them richer. That's a better investment for their money. The National Christian Foundation, the 8th largest US nonprofit, sent $56 million to 23 organizations labeled hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Council for National Policy also coordinates a dark money network. Between 2015 to 2017 alone, $280 million in religious dark money flowed globally from just 28 US Christian groups. Just 28. The Mercer family contributed $100 million to the Heritage Foundation, which you should know all and well from my videos. And the Adelson family funds anti-Muslim and pro-Israeli forces. And they also traded Luka Doncic. So you tell me who the real terrorist is here. And how can all of this happen? How can they get away with this? Because there is a major enforcement vacuum. ProPublica reports independently that they found more violations in 2 years than the IRS has done in a decade. So it seems like they don't want to look for these people. Maybe because they're being funded by these people. But here are some other examples, because none of this is new. Pastor Billy Graham, no relation to the wrestler, hid Franklin Graham's $880,000 salary after public scrutiny for how much money he was making. The Family Research Council classified itself as a church just to hide its executive salaries. Focus on the Family made the same changes so they could hide an $89 million budget. Betsy DeVos, the billionaire who bought herself the Secretary of Education job in Trump's first term, lives on a $40 million yacht. She literally said, "We expect a return on investment," when she was talking about her political donations. Not God's work, not a moral duty, an investment, a return on it. While she was secretary, she had financial ties to charter schools and systematically defunded public education. She painted herself as fighting for Christian values, all the while dismantling and defunding schools that serve the poorest kids in America. She also funded crisis pregnancy centers that spread misinformation about pregnancies to women. The Koch brothers, they've pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into Christian political organizations. They made all of their money on oil and chemicals. Now, their refineries destroy and pollute the earth. If you believe God gave us dominion on earth, why, as a good Christian, would you try and ruin and pollute it? That does not seem Jesus-like to me. Barside, an industrialist, donated $1.6 billion to Marble Freedom Trust, which funds Leonard Leo's network of religious liberty organizations. Leonard Leo would go on to handpick 6 out of the 9 conservative Supreme Court justices that sit on the seats right now. And what did those justices do? Well, let's see. They gutted campaign finance laws. They eliminated environmental protections. And oh yeah, they gave massive tax breaks to billionaires and repealed Roe v. Wade. So, meanwhile, with all of those tax breaks for billionaires, millions of people are struggling with flattened wages, with job loss, and deaths of despair going through the roofs. Great Christian people we have there. They're cutting USAID off to help children that are born with AIDS, veterans programs, Medicaid and Medicare, so they can privatize and profit off of all of those industries. None of that shows Christian values, in my opinion, but maybe y'all know the Bible better than me. So they preach about the sanctity of life while cutting programs that save kids' lives. Jesus was a refugee, but Jesus lovers are funding ICE. Make it make sense. But it's not like they haven't been confronted with this hypocrisy. Speaking specifically about Donald Trump and the affair with Stormy Daniels, while he had a wife and a baby, Family Research Council President Tony Perkins said, "We kind of gave him like, all right, man, you get a mulligan, you know? You get a do-over here," is what they said to him. And okay, I get that. Forgiveness is a big creed in Christianity, right? Forgiveness, confession, all that stuff. I get that. Okay, you forgave Donald Trump. But it seems like that mulligan was offered because conservatives need Trump, as pointed out by Perkins. Quote, "We were tired of being kicked around by leftists." But Pastor Perkins, what happened to turning the other cheek? Bygones be bygones. Love your neighbor. Well, to respond, he says, you know, you only have two cheeks. Look, Christianity is not all about being a welcome mat which people can just stomp their feet on. Ah, I see. So Christian values disappear conveniently when it comes to partisan issues. Got it. That's clear to me. And if it isn't clear to you, these people are not Christians. They're venture capitalists in designer crosses, using Jesus as their hedge fund. The struggling families looking for hope and salvation, sold. They're the products being sold. They're the soldiers being sacrificed. So let's connect this back to Vance Balter, the guy who opened our story, knocking door to door with a gun and a manifesto. He thought he was a patriot, a passionate Trump supporter, convinced he was fighting the good fight. He thought he was doing God's work. He thought he was answering the call. But let's trace that phone call, shall we? Vance was struggling economically, culturally, spiritually. He felt left behind, replaced, forgotten. Real pain, real problems that deserved real solutions. Vance was also a Christian. He had been one his whole life. He read his Bible, he went to church, he believed in Jesus. But someone took the most important thing in his life and weaponized it in a time when he was most vulnerable. Someone told him his Christian duty was to hate Democrats. Someone told him spiritual warfare meant actual warfare. Someone told him that loving thy neighbor meant attacking them in the middle of the night. Balter bought the story because the damn Speaker of the House sells the same story, red cows and all. So that voice on the other end of that call wasn't God. It wasn't even a pastor. It was a network of billionaires and grifters who realized they could weaponize the most sacred beliefs and turn them not into just clickbait or voters, but a terrorist group. Oh, what? You don't think these people are a terrorist group? Let's look at the similarities between jihadist rhetoric and extreme Christian nationalist rhetoric, right? So both claim a divine mandate. ICE believes that they're establishing a caliphate ordained by Allah, and the New Apostolic Reformation believes that they're establishing God's kingdom on earth through the Seven Mountains mandate. That seems pretty similar to me. 2, spiritual warfare. ISIS frames their violence as jihad, a holy war against infidels. And the NAR frames their violence as spiritual warfare against demons actually possessing Democrats. No bullshit. Go search that up. And 3, an apocalyptic urgency. ISIS believes they're hastening the end times through their actions, and NAR believes they're fulfilling biblical prophecy to trigger the second coming. purification through violence. ISIS justifies massacres as purifying the world of corruption. NAR justifies political violence as cleansing America of secular sin. Divine protection. ISIS believes martyrs go straight to paradise. NAR believes that they're covered in the blood of Jesus and protected by divine providence. Dehumanization. ISIS calls enemies crusaders and infidels. NAR calls enemies demons, baby killers, and groomers. The rhetoric is super identical. The structure is super identical. And the results are identical. Since 9/11, 130 people have been killed in far-right motivated attacks, and 107 have been killed by jihadist attacks. The Government Accountability Office found that 85 deadly extremist incidents since 9/11, far-right extremist groups were responsible for 73% of them, while radical Islamic extremists were responsible for 27%. This is the same radical terrorism, whether here or abroad, that we've unironically spent trillions of dollars in 20 years bombing the Middle East over. The same ideology that we've been fighting overseas has been growing right here in our own backyard, in our own soil, in our own churches, in our communities, in our own government. We spent 2 decades building a surveillance state to stop foreign attacks while ignoring domestic terrorists who have been radicalized in church basements and Facebook groups. We invaded countries to stop religious extremists while religious extremists were taking over our Supreme Court. What seems to be divine moral authority is actually just tax evasion with a whole lot of steps. It's political influence, it's scapegoat populism, and it's a policy that benefits only the 0.1% while ignoring real Christian values in America. They wrap themselves in the cross while nailing compassion to it. They quote scripture while violating every principle Jesus taught. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled wasn't convincing the world he didn't exist. It was convincing Christians that he was God. The call was coming from inside the White House.